Today, we are looking at chapter 21 of Adam Hamilton's Making Sense of the Bible. Were the dinosaurs on the ark? It's a question that comes up in all kinds of settings, sometimes with humor and sometimes with real curiosity. Now, Hamilton uses it to help us think more deeply about how we read the early chapters of Genesis. He begins by reminding us that the story of Noah and the flood is theological, not zoological. It's not trying to give us a scientific description of a global flood or a literal inventory of animals. Instead, it's a story about God's grief over human violence, God's desire to renew creation, and God's covenant faithfulness. When Genesis says Noah brought every kind of animal onto the ark, it's using ancient categories, not modern biological classifications. The writers were describing the animals they knew, the creatures that filled their world. Dinosaurs weren't a part of their vocabulary or their worldview. Hamilton also points out what science tells us. Dinosaurs went extinct around 65 million years before humans appeared. So the question, were dinosaurs on the ark, is really a question about how we read Scripture. And when we read Genesis in its ancient Near Eastern context, we see that the flood stories share similarities with other ancient flood narratives. That doesn't diminish Scripture. It shows how God uses familiar storytelling forms to communicate divine truth. Now, the point of the story isn't the mechanics of the ark. The point is the message. God takes human evil seriously. God desires to redeem and restore. God makes covenants that endure. So, here are a few questions to reflect on this week as you read the chapter. When you first heard the story of Noah's Ark, how literally did you understand it? What do you think the flood narrative is trying to teach us about God and humanity? What does focusing on the theological message change the way you read the story? Does understanding the science of dinosaurs and the age of the earth help you read Genesis with more peace? Now, Hamilton's chapter reminds us that Scripture and science don't have to compete. The Bible wasn't written to answer questions about prehistoric life. It was written to reveal God's character, God's justice, and God's mercy. And when we let Genesis speak in its own ancient voice, the story becomes even more powerful. A story of judgment, renewal, and a God that keeps covenant with his creation. Thank you for listening, everyone. Grace and peace, friends.